someone donates a stem cell, is that would present a danger for the person, yes or no?
Hold on a minute, Sekou. For some reason, I'm having a hard time understanding the
I'm trying to ask the question: if is it dangerous to give a stem cell?
Is it dangerous? No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. Okay. So let's back up. So, and I need to explain this to people. If it's done correctly, there's no danger. I mean, this is your tissue, all right? So how can it be dangerous if it's your tissue? That's the first thing, all right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm taking your tissue and I'm not changing it, I'm not manipulating it, I'm not doing anything to it, there's no danger. Now, where are the complications associated with it? Well, you could get an infection because that has to do with probably maybe I contaminated the process when I was doing that, but that's not the stem cell's fault. That's the person who did the procedure's fault, correct?
Right.
So there are some concerns that people are worried that you can get cancer and stuff like this. Again, for me, I stay in the area of musculoskeletal injuries. And so I don't take musculoskeletal tissue and inject it for diabetes because that doesn't make sense to me. All right? So, if you got a knee injury and I'm putting this in the knee, I don't think there's any reported studies that are out there that say, oh, this guy gave me my own stem cells and I got a tumor. Okay? So, but again, we have to be careful. If someone has cancer history, then they're not a candidate for stem cells until they've been cleared by their oncologist. Why? Because their stem cells may have that mutated cancer gene. So you just don't know. So you still have to be careful. All right? But when you say dangerous, where the question concerns, where I'm worried about, and I'm sure the FDA is worried, is that when people take these things and they manipulate them. So they say, well, I got the stem cells. I'm going to add a virus to it. Or I'm going to add a vector to it to make it grow faster so it populates. Well, that's a problem because now you've manipulated the cell. You've changed the cell, and it's not in its entirety what it's supposed to be. So there's concerns with that, and I have problems with that because now you're changing things, all right? And so there could be complications if you do that. So I do not manipulate cells. I do not change the cells. I basically am just a carrier that takes them from one area to the next. And if you really believe in this stuff and you understand how it works and you understand the basic science, you don't need to manipulate it or change it. You don't need to add anything to it. Now, when you're using a donor, typically a lot of times people worry about, well, I'm going to get an infection or I'm going to get a rejection. But a lot of these tissues from the umbilical cord, stem cell tissues, are anti-rejection, meaning they haven't been exposed to antigens yet that are coated on their surfaces to allow the tissue to reject them. Okay? Right. Allow you to reject them. And that's important because I tell people that they're like, oh, it's going to get rejected. I'm like, no, it's not. These are, safe in that aspect. The biggest problem is making sure whoever you choose tests for all those diseases we were talking about. Making sure that, saying, hey, you gave me, I'm using a stem cell. Where was the source from? Was those cells tested? Were they tested for, did they follow all the guidelines that is outlined by the American, by the FDA or the ATB requirements to show that there's safe tissue practices? And that's important because, there is no going back. You don't want to give somebody some stem cells that has got bacteria or that has HIV or all the other things in it or hepatitis. So you got to make sure you align with people who really, 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 vet their tissue bank, know what's going on, know how well, how the tissue is processed and goes from there. That's so important.
Interesting. The subject is so interesting. So, Doc, one when you start the process, you evaluate somebody's MRI and you determine what's wrong with their knee or ankle. When did they get to you? When did they come to you to your office to do the stem cell after you have that?
All right, so I'll walk you through it right now. So right now, like for instance, I have an athlete right now that is I just saw last week. He's been having some hip issues, catching, locking his hip. Came to me. I evaluated his hip. I said two things. One is you're very tight. You need to work on your range of motion first. Got an MRI. MRI shows he's got a little bit of a cartilage defect inside his hip joint, and as well as he got a little bit of small tear of his labrum inside the hip. So, but he's tight. I mean, you try to get him to do a squat. He can barely bend down. It's amazing that he can function at that level. His hips are really tight. He can't open his hips up at all. So I said the first thing we need to do, one is we need to really work on. We need to do two things. One is, yes, you're a candidate, but first of all, we need to optimize you. We need to really work on your range of motion, and we need to work on the things that are going to help you out. Because if we got to try to correct what got you into this. He had a very tight hip capsule. So by just working on his range of motion, increases the blood flow to the area, increases sort of kind of the vascularity, breaks down a lot of the inflammation, and also takes all the pressure out of the hip. So he's doing that, and he says, I feel better. But I said, well, we know you feel better, but we need to also address those issues. And the way I explain it is this. The hip joint and any joint in your body glides almost like if I take a piece of ice and throw it against a smooth surface, it slides. Good. Wear and tear is basically taking that same piece of ice and throwing it on a cobblestone ground. It doesn't slide as well. And that's kind of the wear and tear that you get over time being an athlete. What stem cells do and what regenerative therapy can do, it can go in and fill in those nicks and crannies to make it nice and smooth, and it makes it heal. Does that make sense? So that's why people say, oh, my God, I'm not catching anymore. I'm not locking anymore. I feel like I can move better. I've got motion. So that's kind of the process. And then after that, you tell these individuals, in order for those cells and those growth factors to go in there and stick down and adhere, we know it's going to take about 2 weeks. So we say, okay, we're going to get you back gradually, and we're not going to do anything extraneous till then, because we don't want to put those cells in those cracks and those growth factors in those cracks that you have, and you kick them out. So, and a lot of studies are starting to come out where people have MRI'd, like I talked about that athlete earlier, where we MRI'd their hip or their knee. We've shown that we've been able to improve in that arena, and we've been able to get a better contour, or we've shown we got thickening, or we've gotten an increase in that cartilage that was torn or cracked. It's very exciting when you really look at it, because you and I both know, especially when you're playing tennis, you're playing all these high sports where you're running and you're stopping and you're accelerating quickly. Your biggest issue is tendonitis and wear and tear. And no matter who you are as an athlete, no matter what sport you play, the only thing that you have in common is that you're going to get older, and your tendons and your bone and your joints are going to go experience some wear and tear. So if you can reverse that or slow that down, there's a difference between longevity and actually being and having a life after your sport.
Yes. Hey, Doctor. Today our guest for Sekou Radio is Dr. Sadiq Elamine. Doctor, how people get a hold of you? If somebody listening to this radio and says, "Hey, I want to get a hold of that doctor," can you tell us over
Sure, that's a great question. How do you find me?
How you find doctor?
How you find me? All right, so there's two ways you can find me. One is I'll give you my information. So as you know, you can contact us either by our, you call my clinic. The number is area code 678 257-7078. and just say, hey, I heard Dr. Elamine. I'd like to talk to him about regenerative therapy.
Right.
Another way you can get in contact with me is my website is www.elamineorthopedics.com. That's EL-AMIN orthopedics. That's ORTHOPAEDICS.com. So it's www.elamineorthopedics.com.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the American way of spelling orthopedics, PAE. Just because I know you guys got an international show, and it's EL with a dash. And then on social media, I can be found on Instagram. It's Dr. Elamine. Make sure I say this right, because Instagram is important these days. People are like, Dr. Elamine, how do we find you on Instagram? I'm like, on Instagram, basically is Dr. Elamine Sports Medicine.
Right.
It's Dr. Elamine Sports Medicine.
Right.
And then, you can also on Facebook, you can find Elamine Orthopedics. You just search that, and also on Twitter. So, I mean, those are the ways you can find me. That's all a lot of athletes find me.
Great. Sekou Radio, we want to thank Dr. Elamine for coming to our show. We're definitely going to share it and publish how to find you. And I will get back to you personally to speak to you. And thank you again. And that was the wrap-up of Sekou Radio today. Thank you for the listeners, and thank you for people who are interested in stem cells. That'll give you a lot of information. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.